I'm Ned Jenny, licensed psychologist and owner and CEO of Edward Jenny and Associates in West Grove, Pennsylvania. And that back there is Maya, my golden retriever. I want to talk to you a little more about the things that can mimic ADHD and the reason why we try to do very thorough evaluations before making that diagnosis. So I talked about anxiety in the last video, and I'm going to talk a little more about anxiety here with a little bit more nuance perhaps. But the point here is that anxiety and ADHD can look exactly the same from the outside, and even in some ways from the inside. And that's because a lot of the same neurological circuits are involved in both anxiety and attention. But anxiety can hijack some of those functions that we would need in order to pay attention well. And that is why it starts to look like ADHD. So in order to understand this, we need to understand a little bit about the neurobiology of emotion and threat detection. So a critical part of the brain that's involved in identifying threats in our environment is the amygdala. And you can think of the amygdala as a part of the brain that is monitoring the flow of sensory information in through the eyes and the ears and all of our sense organs. And it flags stimuli that it associates with danger, either from prior experience or from sort of hardwired instinct. So the amygdala is always sort of sampling the stream of information coming into our bodies. If it determines that there's a threat, then it's going to override a lot of the other functions of the brain because survival is more important than getting an A on your next essay. And in many ways, the brain is going to prioritize survival over everything else. So guess what? If the amygdala perceives a threat, it's going to override everything else, and you're going to look very scattered and ADHD-like. So one of the places that it pulls resources from is a section of the brain toward the front here called the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is one of the newest parts of the brain in evolutionary terms, and it's involved in a lot of the things that we associate with modern humans. So the ability to plan, the ability to filter out unnecessary stimuli, the ability to get things done, essentially. But if the amygdala flags something as a threat, all bets are off. And all of those sort of higher functions of reasoning are going to be put on hold so that priority is given to survival. So anxiety doesn't just make you worried, it actually pulls resources from other parts of the brain and interferes with your ability to function. Another thing that can happen is if we're under long-term stress, hormones like cortisol accumulate in our system and can begin to interfere with our ability to stay focused. A little bit of cortisol is really helpful in motivating behavior and getting us out of a jam. But if it goes on for a long time, it becomes much more detrimental. So we want to treat anxiety, we want to lower those levels of cortisol, we want to balance our nervous systems so that we're not in chronic stress. So what does anxiety look like that can mimic ADHD? People who are anxious often report racing thoughts, and these racing thoughts are often wildly off the task that they're trying to accomplish. That sounds a lot like ADHD. They have difficulty completing tasks because they might worry about the outcome. They might be concerned about shame or getting bad feedback or any number of different things. So that leads them to avoid tasks that they think might put them in a position of being negatively evaluated or judged. So anxiety is typically connected to tasks that involve social evaluation or performance contexts. ADHD, on the other hand, doesn't differentiate in that way. So ADHD we tend to see across different settings, whereas anxiety is typically connected specifically to those situations where we feel like we might be judged or evaluated. So ADHD is more context independent, and anxiety spikes in very specific situations. So it's really important in an evaluation to take a very detailed history and to ask about when these symptoms are present or not present. And that can be really important at getting to the right diagnosis. ADHD and anxiety can coexist in the same person. Someone can have both ADHD and anxiety, but they're not the same thing, and we don't treat them in the same way. A person with anxiety can score very high on an ADHD screener because they are having trouble staying on task, but for very different reasons, right? It's anxiety, it's not the prefrontal cortex. So when we do these evaluations, we probe for very specific details about when the problem happens, where it happens, any family history, any medical conditions. All of these things contribute to the diagnosis. So that's what a good evaluation looks like. The screener is helpful. The screener starts the process, but it doesn't answer the whole question, why am I the way I am? And that's important because, again, as I've said in the last couple of videos, if we diagnose incorrectly, it leads to the wrong treatments that might make the condition much worse. Stimulants that do a great job with activating the prefrontal cortex and helping people stay on task make people with anxiety much worse. And their symptoms would actually worsen with the addition of a stimulant medication. Anxiety, on the other hand, does respond really well to psychotherapy. So a lot of the cognitive behavioral treatments, psychodynamic treatments, acceptance and commitment therapy, all of these work really well to help people with anxiety and to re-regulate their nervous systems so that they're not having as much difficulty. We've treated a number of people who thought they had ADHD, but when we dug a little deeper into it, we found other factors that were more important and more salient in them getting better. And once we focused on those things, they began to experience significant improvements. So what I want to leave you with is the idea that a good evaluation by a trained professional like a psychologist is going to look at the whole picture, not just the presence or absence of specific symptoms. And we're going to help you understand exactly what's going on and how to get better. We hope to hear from you, and we would love to answer any questions you have about any difficulties you're having or the types of evaluations that we offer. Thank you.